Do you think you're in control? Or are you doing exactly what the media wants you to do? What if I told you this programming was tearing families apart, fueling political hatred, and reshaping your emotional responses without your consent? Because that's exactly what is happening. Every day, media outlets use a technique called neuro-linguistic programming, or NLP for short, and it's not just a way to sell products or drive clicks. It's a system of psychological control that's changing how you think, how you feel, and who you trust. This isn't conspiracy, it's conditioning, and it's a type of conditioning that is damaging your mental health. We're talking it raises stress levels, it increases reactivity, and it erodes your ability to make decisions for yourself. This process starts subtly. You're scrolling through your feed, a handsome news anchor locks eyes with the camera, a headline flashes in bold, everything ends tomorrow. So you pause, you click, you keep watching, and not because you're curious, but because you were nudged expertly by a language designed to bypass your critical thinking. Neurolinguistic programming was developed in the 1970s to study how language patterns influence behavior. Nowadays, marketers, influencers, and media networks use it by embedding commands inside questions and hijacking your imagination with sensory loaded phrases. Phrases like, just imagine if, or you might be wondering. It sounds like your voice because it's meant to, and over time, that narrative becomes your own. Come on. How many times have you caught yourself repeating something you heard on your favorite podcast as if it was something you came up with yourself? In 2011, Stanford researchers found that language patterns alone, without strong evidence, can influence more effectively than facts. In other words, the structure of a sentence influences our beliefs more effectively than the content. So when a host says, you know this is the only solution, that's not confidence, that's suggestion. And when a post starts with, you'll never believe what they're hiding, that's not curiosity. That's a planted seed of distrust that affects your thinking before you've had the chance to evaluate the situation for yourself. And here's the scariest part. The more time you spend in those spaces, the more your brain adapts to the rhythm of their language. It starts to feel so comfortable, so normal. Eventually, their voice becomes yours. So here's how it works. Neurolinguistic programming uses the structure of language, not just words, but tone, metaphor, pacing, to trigger specific mental and emotional states. Once you're in that emotionally heightened state, it then becomes more challenging to think critically. And because it's not obvious, that's what makes it so effective and nefarious. Let's break it down. First, we have emotional priming. A news report doesn't just say, there was a protest, it says, chaos erupted in the streets. Notice how charged that language is. Your nervous system activates, and before you can even process the facts, you're already in an alarmed state of threat. Next come the embedded commands. These are basically just phrases hidden inside normal speech that influence your behavior. Like when a host says, you want to stay with me to the end, or we already know who's to blame. It sounds conversational, but it's actually guiding your thought process without your permission. Then there's mirroring. Media personalities speak in a rhythm that matches your own internal voice. They use phrases like, you're probably thinking, or if you're anything like me, it creates a false sense of intimacy. So you start trusting them not because they're credible, but because they sound so familiar. This then creates what psychologists call narrative coupling, which is when your brain starts to sync with the storyteller's emotional patterns. And once that happens, your brain automatically starts reinforcing their ideas as your own, which has real psychological consequences. Studies not only show that frequent exposure to emotionally charged language increases your cortisol levels, which is your stress hormone, but you yourself become more reactive, more anxious, and less tolerant of nuance, and worse yet, less capable of seeing people who disagree with you as even human. And the worst part is, the more it happens, the more difficult it becomes to spot. None of us are immune to this. Your mind just adapts. What once felt extreme now feels normal, and your sense of reality starts to narrow. Think of how you would have reacted 10 years ago to a headline you've heard recently, and then think of how you actually reacted to that headline. This is how two people can watch the same story and walk away with completely different perspectives about what happened. Both absolutely certain, both emotionally overactivated, and both unwilling to listen. Sound familiar? So, Dr. Charles, what can we do? None of us are immune. Okay. First, recognize the signs. When language feels unusually urgent, dramatic, or emotionally charged, pause. Ask yourself, is this information or suggestion? If you feel emotionally provoked before you've had a chance to process the facts and make a proper decision for yourself, it's a red flag. You're being manipulated. Second, step back from the loop. The algorithm feeds you what keeps you reactive. So if everything you're seeing makes you angry and afraid, it's by design. Take breaks and intentionally diversify your media. Switch up your algorithm. Read slower sources. Listen to opposing views, not because you agree with them, but to remind yourself that reality isn't a singular script. Third, retrain your attention. Your mind is shaped by what you repeatedly focus on. So start your day with intention, not input. Don't let the first thing you consume be someone else's emotional manipulation. And finally, work on reclaiming your voice. That quiet voice beneath all the noise. The one that isn't trying to sell you something to scare you or convince you. The one, that knows how to think and not just parrot everyone else's opinions. Because the real danger of neurolinguistic programming isn't that it just changes your thoughts. It's that over time, it can convince you that those thoughts were yours to begin with. But the thing is, awareness breaks the pattern. Once you see the strings, it's a lot tougher to become the puppet. Thank you as always for watching. I'm Dr. Charles, and I'll see you for the next check in.